Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
I would recommend Angel Care to anybody. They have really helped me regain my strength.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible. Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
I couldn't have survived this without Angels Care.
Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching. Thanks to our producer, Jeff DeRoll. We're in the City Commission chambers at City Hall with Hayes City Manager Toby Dougherty, our Community Connection. Toby, we want to talk with you, if we could, about the Strong Towns philosophy, the Strong Towns event. What's the proper term here?
Well, Strong Towns is actually, to me, it's a way of life. It's a new way of looking at things. Strong Towns, in reality, is actually an organization founded by a gentleman in Minnesota. I was introduced to Strong Towns about a year and a half ago by actually Greg's son, the county administrator. We were having coffee one day, and he said, "You ever heard of this group called Strong Towns?" I said, "No," and he sent me the link, and I started reading, and it's like a million light bulbs just went off in my head all at once, because prior to this, I had had a lot of independent thoughts sort of floating around my head, and it wasn't until I actually started reading some of the Strong Towns documents that I started pulling these thoughts together into a coherent thought. What Strong Towns is all about, the fundamental message in Strong Towns is that cities are on unsustainable courses. And it's not just one city, it's all cities. They're on unsustainable courses. Cities have done a bad job of accounting for the liabilities they are incurring for their infrastructure. They have taken short-term gains in different types of taxes and used those monies to pay for the most pressing issues with regard to their infrastructure, but ignored the overall long-term liability. And because of the way cities have developed and starting in the 50s, the development around the automobile rather than the pedestrian, that it's something that all cities sort of did at once, and now all cities are starting to realize it at once. There was no test cases for this. There was no, these 5 cities did it, and now, it was everybody did it once, and now everybody's starting to feel the effects. It actually starts at the national level. At the national level, with the Eisenhower administration, the Interstate Highway Act was passed, and they built a lot of interstate highways, and the Federal Highway Trust Fund is created, and we have built a lot of interstates and infrastructure since then. And the argument a few years ago at the federal level was this trust fund is insolvent. We can't afford to build new roads, let alone take care of what we have. We don't have enough revenues coming in. Something has to change. That is a large overview of what we're dealing with at the local level too. So basically the Strong Towns message is cities are accepting short-term gains, but massive infrastructure obligations for the future. In lieu of a staff retreat this year, I challenged my staff to determine, is this true or not? There were some things that we intuitively knew. We know that every year, and going back as far as I can remember and as far as I can find in the minutes of the meetings, we have been struggling to find enough money for streets. Only in the past couple years have we actually started to quantify what we should be spending in streets, but we've always had a hard time coming up with money. I think we intuitively knew that we weren't spending enough on water line replacement and sewer line replacement. We have 120 miles of water lines, 120 miles of sewer lines, 1,500 manholes. About 10 years ago, we started a pretty aggressive program to replace water lines in the older part of town. We knew we were doing some good, but we didn't really know how much good we were doing. Sewer lines, we just didn't know. What I do know is we hadn't spent anything on sewer lines ever. We had never budgeted money for replacement of sewer lines. But sewer lines get put in the ground and you forget about it. They're buried, sometimes 25 foot deep, and you actually just forget about it. As long as they're functioning, you think they're functioning, you forget about it. And the infrastructure is designed to last for a long time. But we're reaching the point now where our oldest infrastructure is coming of age. So we decided to ask how the condition is. What should we be spending our money on? We decided to ask the tough questions. We've actually spent the last couple of years having our sewer system cameraed, and by the end of, I believe, 2018, we will have our entire sewer system cameraed. More importantly, we will have every issue in that sewer system documented, videoed, what's wrong, where's it at on a GPS standpoint, and try to figure out what it would take to get that fixed. So there's a difference between just intuitively knowing you should be spending some money and actually quantifying it and figuring out where you need to be spending that money. And so we took this on as a staff retreat this year, and our findings weren't really shocking. Our findings just sort of quantified what we knew to be a reality, but now it is a very, very, very real reality that we have to deal with. And the reality is we should be spending $3 million a year on streets based off of the amount of streets we have, the age, the condition, and the volume, meaning how wide the streets are. We know that we should expect to spend about $3 million a year on streets, about half of that for replacement, about half of that for maintenance. We have regular revenues of $500,000 for that. We have done a good job in the past of using KDOT money, 80/20 money, and you can just start going down the list. Hall Street, Vine Street, 22nd Street, 41st Street recently, 8th Street. There's just the 27th Street through the Vine Street intersection back in the 90s, Vine Street south of I-70 back in the 90s. These were all projects that were done with 80/20 KDOT money. That money is no longer available. The state changed their funding formula. They pulled the plug on that money. We can no longer count on that money being there. It's just not there. The City Commission has done a good job of utilizing sales tax monies to help fund the street program. But the sales tax monies are dwindling as we grow into that sales tax, because as we grow out in area, that means we have to add more firefighters and more police officers, and we have more parks, and we have more parks to take care of, and more right-of-way, and more streets to take care of, and more service division personnel. And so that means that sector grows, and that's actually what's directly funded by the sales tax. So the money we have for streets is less. Sales tax to spend on streets is less. From a water system standpoint, we've never really had a dedicated capital rate. We've identified we have problems we need to address in the collection system or the distribution system. We started replacing old lines, but when you look at it the last 10 years, we've spent on average about $450,000 a year replacing old water lines, which is pretty good. We should be spending $900,000 a year based on the age and condition and expected lifespan of our system. We should be spending $900,000. So we thought we were doing good, but we need to be doing better. On the sewer system, we have been spending nothing on sewer line replacement. We should be spending $1 million a year based off of our age, condition, and expected lifespan. And now that we're actually doing the cameraing of the system, we know that $1 million is pretty accurate. For example, we have 1,500 manholes in the city of Hays. And manholes are something that you can rehab for $5,000 to $10,000. You can replace for $30,000 to $40,000 because they're very deep buried infrastructure. Only last year did we do a test pilot project, and this year was our first. We actually regularly budgeted to start manhole rehab program. What all this means is we have been not paying that much attention to infrastructure, and I'm not going to fault anybody that came along before me. The reason we know this now is because we asked the tough questions. We said we need to know this. We need to start looking at this like a business. And businesses figure out where they should be spending their money on, and they depreciate their capital assets, and they plan for replacement of their capital assets. It's hard to do that as a city sometimes because let's take your buried infrastructure. It gets buried, it lasts for a long time. It's really hard for somebody in my position to say, we need to start setting aside $5,000 a year for this water line when it's brand new, because somebody's going to come along and say, well, it's going to be 60 years before we have to deal with that. Why worry about it now? We'll pay for that later. And so the path of expedience usually gets checked. Streets are a little bit of the same way. They last a long time. It's very hard. And because we kind of did this all at once, because when you look at the history of Hays, a lot of our infrastructure is very recent. And I say relatively recent. Since 1950, we have either built or rebuilt 84% of our infrastructure. So take Main Street, for example. Main Street was around before 1950, but it was rebuilt in the 90s. So since 1950, we have added 84% of our infrastructure. A lot of that infrastructure has an expected lifespan of 40, 50 years. So you can imagine how it's all starting to come of age at once. And so that's where, when we had the joint meeting with the City Commission, the Planning Commission, we pointed out that things are probably going to have to change because we have very clear holes that we're going to have to plug, and right now we don't want to compound the liability. We are funded predominantly with the sales tax. We get some property tax money at the city, but it doesn't account for much. When somebody pays their property taxes on their house, the majority of it goes to the county and the school district. The majority of the tax goes to the school district. The vast majority goes to the county and the school district. The city actually gets a very small portion. And part of our small portion is a direct pass-through for the library. So when you look at what we actually get, when you look at the money we get that actually, of property tax, that actually helps pay for police and fire and parks and service division to work on streets, it's minimal. It's almost nothing. So what some people view as progress, meaning new residential streets and new houses, I can document as a liability. City as a business, I can document as a liability because those endeavors that serve that area are funded with the sales tax. And it's one of the interesting concepts we laid out to the governing bodies is the reason we laid this out is not to say we have all the answers, because we don't. The reason that we laid this out is to point out that there's a problem that exists right now, and the problem is we have underfunded infrastructure. On the water and sewer side, it's probably going to materialize in a rate increase. We're too far behind the curve to not have a rate increase. We have to take care of this stuff. If we can rehab a sewer line for $60,000 versus replacing it for $1 million, spend the $60,000 and get it done. And so we're going to have to spend a lot of money on routine and preventative maintenance to try to make sure we keep the system viable. But we're too far behind the curve to just ignore it. We're going to be forced to raise rates. What I advised them on the streets was, don't compound the liability until you figure out how to address the issue. Now, what that means is don't add any more streets because we're already upside down. And unless that street comes with sales tax revenue, which helps pay for not only that street but all the other streets. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people viewed the message as anti-development. It's not anti-development. It's just, let's figure out this problem before we go. If you have overspent on your credit cards and you have a looming debt here, you better figure out where you're going to go and how you're going to pay it off before you just go putting more stuff on the credit card. And that was the basic message. We have a lot of work ahead of us at the governing body level to figure out how to get out of this issue and how to deal with it going forward. The good news is we haven't hit an iceberg and we're not sinking. We're not Detroit that is depopulated and you have infrastructure for 2 million people and 500,000 residents. We're nowhere near that. We're in a good position. We have a good economy. We have a diverse economy. We have great neighborhoods. We have a very viable economic market here. We have a good retail market here. We have a lot of good things going for us. The reality is I know how to budget. I know how to plan, and I know where expenditures go and what we should be spending our money on, and I can see what's going to happen if we don't address this problem. And what's going to happen is we can see the iceberg in the distance, and if we don't change course, we're going to hit it. And it's probably going to be pretty ugly before we do, because we're going to be scrambling to try to spend money on streets when we're very far behind the curve. We're going to have to end up cutting services somewhere, which means people aren't going to be happy because they're going to lose their swing set in their park and their restroom, and the park may be shuttered. And we're going to cut back on inspections and nuisances and firefighters and police. And there's just going to be this, and I've seen this replicated across the country a few times. It's probably not going to be very pretty unless we figure out how to get out of it. One of the things we laid out to the governing body was we have a lot of streets that are undeveloped. If you drive around town, you'll see a lot of areas that have streets, water, sewer, and they're undeveloped. We have a lot of properties that are underdeveloped. And by underdeveloped, I mean you may have a property that has $1 million worth of infrastructure in front of it, and it may be a vacant lot, or it may be something that could be taking place out in the county because it really has nothing to do with being in the city, but that's what it's being used for. That's an underdeveloped property. And so we have potential. And the city of Hays has very high land prices within and around the city. And that's a complaint I've heard for a long time here. The high land prices have actually translated into something that I think is great. It's this organic redevelopment that's going on. Commerce Bank decided that they want to relocate. They're going to develop an existing site. So they bought the parcel from the county that was not being utilized for anything at a very high profile location. They built a bank there. Across the street on 22nd Street, you had essentially a vacant lot, or a lot that was being used for some bulk storage, that's now being turned into 4 viable businesses. Where the old home lumber was at, that could have been vacant for a long time, which would mean underutilized. It's now 2 very viable businesses. There's a gentleman that opened up an auto repair shop across the street, across Vine Street from the the water treatment facility, where the old Jant Oil property was at. So a non-viable property, an eyesore, is now a viable business, which is not an eyesore. They did a great job with it. We see all of this redevelopment going on. That's an effect of the high land prices, because I'm sure some of these endeavors would have just been fine taking place on a greenfield site, but they couldn't afford to buy the land. And the reason I think this is great is because now we have all of these additional businesses. We're growing, right? But we don't have to add streets, we don't have to add water, we don't have to add sewer because it's already there.
The infrastructure was already there.
Exactly. So now these people are going to generate property tax, they're going to generate sales tax, they're going to add to the economy, but we're not compounding the liability. That was the message of the governing body. Let nature take its course a little bit. Let's see what can happen without compounding the liability, and let's see where that balance is before we have to figure something out. Because the last thing I want to do is recommend raising taxes, and that's not going to be my recommendation. Right now, we have determined it would take about 12 mills to fund the street program, to fund the shortfall and ensure that new development pays its way. Meaning, if we have a property tax in place for streets, but right now, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't think we should just raise taxes to continue something that may not be the most efficient use of our property, if it means that we're going to allow existing infrastructure to go unfilled and underutilized, because we still have to take care of that. We still have to provide police and fire and parks and everything else. And if we just continue to grow out, then you're going to have some problems.
And that's part of the problem with the anti-sustainability, if you will.
Yes.
That growth, as you said, translates into the need for additional services and additional infrastructure, which right now would mean that your current infrastructure, you've got to postpone and let somebody else deal with it. So you're making the hard choices.
We are, but that's what they pay me for. I use the analogy of an accountant. If you are a business owner and you're losing money, and your accountant doesn't make you aware of that, you're probably not going to have that accountant around very long. And so once at the staff level, we started asking these tough questions, and we started going from an intuitive knowledge to a direct knowledge because we've done the math. And when I talk at the staff level, I'm talking 20 people. I'm talking about the executive staff of the City of Hays over a period of 6 months, a lot of day-long meetings dealing with this. This isn't just something we did back of the napkin. We have a duty to bring that forward. We have a duty to keep reminding the governing bodies of this. And so we're probably not going to be making some popular recommendations, but we think they're recommendations we have to make.
And that could include funding for sewer replacement, maintenance, same thing with streets, the big infrastructure areas.
Yeah, it's about tough choices. And one of the tough choices I'm going to have is, I just mentioned that I don't think the first reaction should be to raise taxes. The first reaction should be, how can we get out of this situation without raising taxes? Is there a way to get out without raising taxes? As I mentioned, if you make better utilization of your existing infrastructure, you can grow your economy and even your housing economy without raising taxes, and then generate more off of that infrastructure. Water and sewer, it's going to be extremely difficult to do that, and rate increases are inevitable, and that's going to hit people's pocketbooks, and people aren't going to like that, and I don't like making those recommendations, but they're recommendations I feel we have to make. So let's keep those to a minimum, because we can do a little bit of that in our water and sewer infrastructure too. If we can accommodate that growth and we can get a regular capital rate in place, we can have more people paying that capital rate, more customers on the same existing infrastructure that can help pay for the depreciation and maintenance of that infrastructure. But we can't, I don't think we can do it without raising rates, because we have not had that regularly scheduled capital rate that's just part of your bill right now. And so we're going to have a rate. My goal is to keep that rate adjustment as low as possible, and then try to generate economic activity off the existing infrastructure.
Let's turn our attention to some of the other current issues that you and the Commission and staff deal with on a regular basis, and that would be water use. Fill us in on where we are.
Well, water use is, for the year, we've been pretty good. We had some rainfall earlier. Our sources are in what I would call good condition. Big Creek is still stressed from the drought. The Smoky Hill River aquifer, which fills up very quickly, is probably at its apex right now. Given the heat, given the fact that people are starting to turn their sprinklers on more, even people with warm season grass lawns are just given a little bit of a drink. We're probably going to start seeing, with this next week's usage, we'll start seeing usage go up a little bit. We're going to go back to monitoring the sources every week and see if we can spot trends. But right now we're in a good position. Our conservation programs, we're hitting all of those hard, from toilet replacements, cash for grass, urinal replacements, things like that. Jason Regal, our water conservation specialist, is beating the bushes. And we've had really good success. I think we budgeted this year for 50 lawns for the cash for grass, and that you can pay a homeowner up to $1,000, $1 per square foot, to tear out their cool season grass and replace it with either warm season grass, xeriscaping, artificial turf, something that utilizes less water. We budgeted 50, and I think we're close to 40 right now. We've had to take advantage of that. Extremely successful program, and we will find money if we go through what our budget is. We'll find some money if we have more applicants than budget.
Yeah, I was going to say, with warm season grasses, now's the time for planting and getting them started.
Exactly.
To establish. Bring us up to date, if you would, on the R9 Ranch.
The R9 Ranch, about a year ago, the governing body directed me to begin the regulatory process, and we've been working in the background. There was a joint meeting on Tuesday with Russell, and the purpose of the joint meeting with the Russell City Council Hayes Commission was to let the governing bodies know that we're ready to roll right now. We've done all of our preliminary work. The actual change applications to change the place of use and the type of use were actually filed this morning with the Department of Agriculture in Manhattan. And we are very excited about this. It's going to be a fairly lengthy regulatory process. It's just designed to be that way. But I'm just excited because we've gone from working in the background to this is real, this is public, it's official because the official documents have been filed. And so it's going to be a great project. It's going to be a lengthy project. Right now we have to get through the regulatory process to determine how much water is going to be available to utilize from the ranch, and whether or not we're going to be able to move the water from there to here. And then we talk about cost. We have preliminary cost estimates of $72 million, but once we get through that regulatory process, we fine-tune the cost estimates. We determine exactly what that's going to be as far as an impact on your water rates, and then we talk about what that's going to do, and that'll be the public discourse of are we ready to pull the trigger on it. The good news is we have $30 million in the bank to help pay for it, and we have a half-cent sales tax that the residents of Hayes enacted in the late 90s, knowing that whatever solution long-term was going to be expensive. And so between the money in the bank and the annual revenues from that sales tax, we have a pretty good revenue stream to pay for any revenue bonds going forward. So it's not like the ratepayers are going to be footing the full load for that. It'll only be a portion of that.
It's kind of like that infrastructure term you were using earlier, where some planning ahead yielded some benefits in the future.
Exactly. It's a great example. And they knew it was going to be expensive. Don't wait for it to sneak up on you and then try to figure out how you're going to pay for it.
Hayes City Manager Toby Dougherty from City Hall, our Community Connection. Thanks for watching.
Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
There's not any words to describe their kindness.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible. Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
They saved my life.